Happy Wednesday, everybody. We're only about 3.5 hours from the start of the league here, right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. Lance Medow, John Schmeelk with you. The phone number is 201-939-4513. Want to make sure we get a lot of your calls in today, reacting to the latest news of the last couple of days. We've talked about some of the reports that are out there as to what the Giants will hopefully finalize when the league year becomes official at 4 o'clock. Just to stress, during this legal negotiating period, any reports we mentioned are just that, reports. We are not confirming anything. The Giants have not confirmed anything, and we're talking about these in a hypothetical, abstract type of way. Because the league does not allow anything to be finalized before 4 o'clock. And as we've learned in past years, Lance, things can change quickly once physicals are given and things like that, and deals that people think are going to happen don't happen, and things can change quickly. So important to note that anything we're talking about here today is not official, and it's simply based off of reports that we're seeing from outside media outlets.
Well, because all of these deals are pretty much verbal commitments at this point.
Yep.
And verbal commitments, until they get down on pen and paper, could drastically change, to your point. And I think we've seen some well-documented examples. One that comes to mind, if you remember a few years ago, Frank Gore. It looked like he was heading to another team, and then all of a sudden wound up going in a complete opposite direction. So that's more of a reason why all 32 teams pretty much subscribing to the same school of philosophy, no different here than anywhere else. But there have been some rumors. Giants appear to be busy based on reports and seem to continue to find ways to try to not just add complementary pieces, but specifically on offense, a guy like Darren Waller, who perhaps could be somebody that I think could be a main focal point for Daniel Jones and company here moving forward.
Yeah, multiple reports out there that the Giants have traded a draft pick. The draft pick they obtained from the Chiefs in the Kadarius Toney trade. That was one of the compensatory picks, I believe, that the Chiefs
Correct.
had
It was the one they got from Toney.
For
Yeah.
Ryan Poles, if I'm not mistaken, becoming the general manager in Chicago. So that's the pick that the Giants, again, according to reports, have sent to the Raiders for Darren Waller, pending a physical and other details that we don't know. And Lance, look, we kind of talked about this in theory at the Combine. I think we talked about it either the week after or the week before, where we know the Giants need to add weapons around Daniel Jones. And we knew the wide receiver free agent market wasn't great. We knew the draft wasn't great. And we had talked here about whether or not you think about adding a tight end early in the draft. And we talked about the type of tight end that would make sense next to Daniel Bellinger. And we talked about a guy that was probably more of a receiver, a guy that can split out wide and do all those sorts of things and be the complement to Bellinger, who's more of that two-way, inline, wide type of tight end. And, well, they didn't do it in the draft. But, again, if these reports are correct, at 4 o'clock we'll find out if they have, in fact, landed Darren Waller, who is, as a pure receiver, top 3 tight end in the league if you just talk about the receiving aspect of things. Now, the last 2 years, he's had a series of injuries. There's been a minor shoulder. There's been an ankle. There's been a knee. There's been hamstring. Yeah. So he's been limited the last couple years in terms of playing time, and therefore his production has been limited as well. Last year he played only 9 games. In 2021 he only played 11. Still had 55 catches for 665 yards in those 11 games, by the way. But his 2 monster years came in 2019 and 2020, where he played in all 16 games in those 2 years. Had 90 catches one year, 107 the other, over 1,140 yards in both years, 12 total touchdowns in those 2 seasons. So when he's healthy and he's good, he is a legitimate, and I'll quote Paul Dottino, headache player that other teams have to game plan against. And I think the Giants found the creative way here to add a weapon in Darren Waller, which I think you have to like.
Absolutely. Well, also keep this in mind. Mike Kafka comes from Kansas City, where Travis Kelce was clearly their number 1 wide receiver. They didn't necessarily have somebody, I think, that had that label at that
this
position.
Year at least, except for Tyreek Hill before, obviously.
Correct. Yeah, but I mean, even Tyreek Hill is sort of a jack of all trades. He's not like that big monster guy that you're bringing down the sideline. I mean, he's a guy that you can run to the backfield. I mean, I look at him as just a versatile weapon. I don't even know if I would label him necessarily a wide receiver. I don't think it does justice for his game. But Kelce was the prominent focal point on offense, and it wouldn't surprise me if Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, Joe Schoen had conversations, and Kafka said, hey, listen, when we're in Kansas City, it worked with Kelce. It could work with Darren Waller, assuming, of course, that Waller holds up. You mentioned he had some injuries. It was the knee issue in the Thanksgiving game against the Cowboys 2 years ago. That's what forced him to miss the majority of the second half of the season. He just had a lingering hamstring issue last year where they said, hey, get healthy. We're going to put you on injured reserve and then see if you come back in the latter part of the season. That was really the philosophy for the Raiders. And if he gets now a fresh slate, he could hold up. Darren Waller could be the number one guy on the Giants next year, depending on what happens at wide receiver. I would not be surprised to see that. This is a guy that is a tight end frame, but he has a wide receiver skill set. I mean, I remember I watched Raiders games. They would run plays for him where they would run him up the sideline. Like a typically big wide receiver.
100%.
And they'd throw him a jump ball, he'd make the catch, and somehow he'd get into the end zone. And I think he has some underrated speed and quickness for a guy his size.
No, I mean, he's an athlete. He's basically he might have a TE next to his name on the roster, but he's really a WR. He plays out wide. If he has to block in line, he can do it, but that's not what he's there to do per se. Also a staple on Lance Medow's fantasy football team.
Has been, sure. Yes. That's fair.
But and then if you look at the contract, he's 31. He's going to turn 31, I believe he was September, if I recall. I'll double check that. Let me double check that right here. He will turn 31 in September, on September 13th, just 4 days after me. And I'm not 31, no, unfortunately.
Well, that's why they acquired him, because it was within the birth date of you.
Correct.
So that was their thinking.
And if you take a look at the contract, he has 4 years left on his deal. This is the only year, again, this is according to Over the Cap, if it in fact is indeed true. He only has guaranteed money left in this year of the contract. He basically has $51.5 million left over the course of those 4 seasons. His cap number the next 4 years are 11-8, 11-7, 13, and 15. So especially those first 2 numbers, and if he's really productive like he was in 2020 and 2021, that third year too, are all very reasonable numbers, which is why having a really good tight end is actually helpful, because the really good wide receiver costs you 25. The really good tight end costs you almost $10 million less. So that kind of helps. And it gives you some, all right, if the injury problems continue to be an issue, there's a way to get out of it. But I don't think this is considered a one-year rental. They want this guy to become a big part of this passing game for multiple years, given his skill set.
Yeah, especially since, once again, there's also not as much mileage on his tires, given the fact that he's missed a handful of games, missed 14 games over the last 2 seasons combined. So I think when you take that into consideration, he's not bringing nearly as much baggage as maybe another typical tight end who is in that 31-year-old ballpark.
He's only played 4 seasons where he had played in more than 11 games. So,
well, because remember, he started his career with Baltimore Ravens. Unfortunately, Waller, it's been well documented, had some drug issues throughout the course of his career, but it's a heck of a comeback story. I mean, what this man has overcome, and for him to emerge as you mentioned, one of the best tight ends in football, and now doing some really great community work off the field. I believe, he's really known for his work in Vegas. He was helping get homeless people off the street. He's got a foundation and so forth. So, there's absolutely no question character-wise, what he's done to turn his life around, and the numbers speak for themselves. And it can be done where if you have multiple complementary guys, let's label it that way, at wide receiver, and Waller is the guy that everybody focuses their attention on, that's going to open up things for Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodgins, Sterling Shepard, Saquon Barkley. You don't have to have a team in football that is appealing from a fantasy standpoint. It's about, can you get guys open? Can you get positive matchups? And it goes back to the coaching staff's ability to scheme accordingly, develop players. Now they have one player in particular that I think, on paper at least, because we haven't seen any games, if you were to ask opposing defensive coordinators going into this hypothetical Giants roster that we're operating with, who do you want to prevent from damaging the game? Darren Waller's the answer now. So if you roll over coverage there, that's favorable to me for Wan'Dale Robinson and Isaiah Hodgins, which means you don't have to have star power everywhere if you can get one guy to shift the defense. And I think Waller absolutely does that.
Yeah, linebackers have no chance against him. Safeties, we've seen try. They even struggle with his speed. So he's a guy that has receiver skills. And again, I think he's a piece of this Giants offense. Putting Saquon Barkley aside, he's more of a running back than a receiver. That is now the most dangerous weapon on the field for the Giants passing game this year. And it's not really, frankly, very close. So that's kind of the big recent news for the Giants. And again, I just think it's, for a late 3rd round pick, Lance, I think it's definitely worth the flyer here, even though he's coming off 2 years where he hasn't been super productive, where, end of the 3rd round, you're getting, you hopefully get like an average starter at some point in that spot. You're not getting someone that can move the needle like this. And again, we talked about the various avenues to add that type of weapon, to your point, that can alter what the defense is doing. and there wasn't a wide receiver in free agency. There might not even have been a wide receiver in the draft, depending on what you think of some of the guys that are going to go this year. So, it was really something that I think it was their best avenue to do it. There are other guys available, again, according to reports via trade. But I think for the price, this was just a real high-value, low-risk type of deal here for the Giants to bring in Waller. Now, I think, the salary, maybe they'll redo the contract and they'll move money around or whatever.
Sure.
But I think this kind of limits some of the other stuff that they're going to be able to do because of that number. But again, you can push money back and you can alter the contract or do it however you want to do it. So I think this was a necessary thing that needed to happen this offseason to add a primary type weapon to the offense, and they figured out a way to do it, and that deserves a tip of the cap to Joe Schoen.
Yeah, I think this is a great value deal because, once again, you're not getting a guarantee to draft Darren Waller in the third round, meaning another player that's going to come in and immediately produce or put some fear in the defense's eyes. So whenever you can turn, and this is my generic philosophy, you can turn the unknown, which is a draft resource, into a known commodity, regardless of some of the injuries he's dealt with. That's a no-brainer. And I think that's how Joe Schoen and company are operating right now. We could take a flyer on the third-round pick, right, if we held on to that, or we could go behind door B, bring in Darren Waller, and he could become all of a sudden the mainstay of our offense that we build around. Plus, I know you mentioned the guaranteed money, but the bottom line is he signed a 3-year extension prior to last season. So the other positive is, regardless of how this pans out, you're acquiring a player that was under contract for the next few years.
Yeah, 4 years.
As opposed to, how often have we seen a player, you acquire them, so you're giving up resources, picks. On top of that, you have to work out a new contract. For example, when the Eagles got A.J. Brown, they gave up draft picks. They had to give him a new deal. And I'm not saying it wasn't a bad move.
No, same for Tyreek Hill, same for Devontae Adams.
Correct.
Go
but
through
this,
the list.
to me, is more appealing where you don't have to worry about the contract.
Sure.
These guys on contract, and you gave up a compensatory pick, and you had a lot of picks to begin with coming in on top of what you got based on the compensatory selection. So all in all, low-risk, high-reward move. Regardless of how it pans out, it's definitely worth rolling the dice.
And the Giants had 11 draft picks. Now they have 10, so they still have plenty of draft
Small
capital.
sacrifice in the big picture things.
Yeah, again, I think this was a good use of resources to try to fill a very specific need for the Giants. And very quickly, Lance, the other two reported sightings, Bobby Okereke and Rakeem Nunez-Roches, thank you.
Yes.
I was just making sure I had the order of the second two names correct in my head before I said it. Again, we knew the Giants, and we talked about this last week. We knew the Giants' rush defense was an issue all year last year. You draft two guys that are good against the run. They fill a need at the interior defensive line, fill a need at linebacker. We both identified those needs as ones I think more likely to be filled in free agency than the draft based on what the draft class looks like and just generally how the NFL works. I think Okereke checks all the boxes for Wink. He's fast. He ran a 4.58. He's long. He's got 34-inch arms. He's productive. He's got range. He's fast. He wants a fast inside linebacker. That's what he is. So I think he checks all the boxes. And then they needed some depth behind Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. And I think, Nunez-Roches fills that perfectly. He's not a star. He's going to be a role player. He's going to play whatever, half the snaps, maybe less, maybe a little bit more, whatever, depending on the game. And he'll help be a good run stuffer and complement to those other two guys. And he can play zero technique. He can play the three. He can play both tackle spots. So, to me, I thought it was two good signings that filled specific needs for the Giants where you're going to head into the draft and you're not sitting there, boy, we have to add somebody here or we're really in big trouble here. So I think that they're doing a good job in free agency checking off some of those boxes.
Yeah, Nunez-Roches helped the Bucs win the Super Bowl. He was part of that rotational group of defensive linemen. So he fits it perfectly for the need of what the Giants are looking for because, they're not necessarily looking for a guy that has to be on the field for all three downs. It's just, can he be in the early downs? Can he be productive to put the opposition in a position where they're not facing 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 3. Maybe it's 3rd and 5 and 3rd and 6 as a result of some of the stops that he can make. No different than what Dalvin Tomlinson did in the early downs. So not a move that you have to break open the piggy bank, but somebody that can wind up playing 45, 50% of the snaps, I think, when it's all said and done with respect to the season. And if you could give Dexter Lawrence a breather here or there, you mix and match personnel, it's an ideal fit for Wink Martindale's system. Bobby Okereke goes back to the conversations we had about if you're going to invest in a linebacker, you want to talk to Wink. And personally, where I felt You want to make sure he can play all 3 downs.
And he's going to be able
And that's
to.
not a question. So that's another reason why this is a really good investment, because you're getting a guy that can run sideline to sideline, has speed, can fill the gaps. Heck, Johnny had a career-high 17 tackles against the Giants. Something tells me when they went back and they watched the film, he may have jumped out to them just a tad.
I mean, he's a tackle machine. 280 tackles over the last 2 seasons, and he was 10th in the league last year with over 150. So,
well, and he finished first and second on the Colts in tackles in each of the last 2 seasons. So he's been a mainstay. He's been durable, too, which I think is another indication, right, when you go out and you sign a free agent. But the most appealing aspect to me is you found a 3-down linebacker. And if we're talking about interior guys, I would favor somebody. There's not a debate. Do we need to take him off the field on 3rd down? You know you can keep him in the mix. It's not to say that they're not going to need depth and they're not going to need other options, but you're not questioning who's our package on 3rd down when you know he can still be an aspect of that. And, depending on who Wink wants to give the helmet to or something like that, he's a strong candidate, knowing that you're not going to remove him from the mix.
And again, those 2 signings, as well as some of the players the Giants have re-signed from their own roster that Paul has talked about over the last couple of days, none of those are official. We're just mentioning reports, and we're commenting on those. We are not confirming anything at all, because nothing can happen until the league year at 4 o'clock. So, again, all this is according to reports, pending physicals. Once you get guys in front of doctors, things can change quickly. So nothing is in stone. We're waiting. But this is some of the stuff that's been reported, so I figured it'd be a good time to talk about it just a little bit. 201-939-4513, 201-939-4513. Now I want to give you guys, we got a full bank of calls, a chance to react to it. But in the meantime, make sure you go subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast. We currently have a one-on-one with Brian Dable on there, with Bob Papa, just talking about the offseason so far, pre any of these signings. So we're not getting any comments on that, unfortunately. We talked to him, last week or a couple weeks ago. So make sure you go check it out. Subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast on the Giants app, podcast platforms everywhere. And there's a chance, maybe, we're going to effort it in the coming days. If the Giants do, in fact, bring us some new players, we'll try to get them up on the Giants Huddle podcast as well. So stay tuned to that. Let's get to the phones at 201-939-4513. UC in St. James is up first. What's up, UC?
John, Lance, 2 words for you. Shane Train. I mean, what a move! What a move by this guy. Like, talk about being a good, proactive general manager. Like, we basically traded Kadarius Toney for Darren Waller. Like, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, not bad, right?
Darren Waller is an elite pass catcher, you would say, right?
Yeah, sure. When he's healthy, for sure.
Absolutely. So, I'm very happy for DJ because now we finally have some elite talent around him. Plus, I don't think we're, done yet necessarily. So my question for you guys is, and maybe I'm getting too excited, so let me know, but do you think we could legitimately contend this year? Because I see no reason why we can't win a division this year, man.
Well, you're coming off a season in which you contended. So, I mean, that alone, I think, is encouraging with respect to what the coaching staff was able to do with limited resources. The goal now is you improve your resources, and you hope that you can take another step. But, keep in mind, they played a lot of close games last season, so there's only so much you can read into that. And the division, here's the thing about the NFC East, which is really no different than other division. The other teams around you, they don't stay where they are, and you just get better. They continue to improve. They continue to tweak their roster. So on the peripheral right now, without knowing what everybody's going to look like finished-wise, yeah, there's no reason why the Giants can't compete, but it doesn't operate where everybody stays as is and the Giants just add talent.
Lance,
you just at least need to keep that in mind.
I have to step out and do something. I'll be back in around
Fair enough.
10 minutes. Take over.
Well, I'm going to move to your seat so this way I can perhaps control the phone calls. All right, well, I was going to help him out, but hey, if Pearson can handle the heavy lifting, then I won't judge. So, UC, I hope that perhaps answers what your question was with respect to just the nature of the division. But, yeah, I mean, based on last season and the fact that they maintained continuity, you have both coordinators still in place. You have your quarterback, your running back you retained, the key weapons on defense. They're in a position where it's not as much as a guessing game as it was at this time last year coming into year one with Brian Dable.
Appreciate it. And I'll take my last question off there. Do you think that we re-sign Slayton? Thanks so much.
All right, you got it, UC. Appreciate the phone call. Paul and I actually were talking about Darius Slayton on Monday's program because we received a lot of phone calls, and I had mentioned that just because they've been active with other wide receivers based on reports, meaning their own internal options, and you haven't heard Darius's name, doesn't mean that there's not a desire to bring him back. It could very well mean, because Joe Schoen, when he spoke to the media following Daniel Jones getting his deal and Barkley getting the franchise tag, he had indicated the front office is now turning their attention to all of their internal free agents. They're talking to the agents. They're getting a feel for what they've heard with respect to the market. And that, to me, is an indication of you're going back to everybody and you're saying, hey, we may have some interest bringing you back. We're exploring our own options. Take a look at the market. Report back to us. If you get an offer, perhaps you could do us the courtesy of presenting the offer, and we could see whether or not we could fit you in. And I think that that probably is a conversation that you're having with Darius Slayton and his representatives. Hey, go out there, explore. If you can get a good opportunity to move up the depth chart or perhaps get some appealing offers, do that. Bring it back to us. If we have the flexibility, fine. If not, we'll go our separate ways. I think with respect to Darius Slayton coming back, it depends on what they think of the draft class. 25th overall, assuming they don't move, they could get a wide receiver in that spot. You have Sterling Shepard. You have Wan'Dale Robinson. You have Isaiah Hodgins. You have Colin Johnson coming back from injury. So that's 4. Now, some of those guys have injury baggage, and there's no guarantee they make the 53-man roster. But does Darius feel it's okay to come back? Is maybe the 4th or the 5th option? Can he get a better opportunity with another team elsewhere? I don't know. I can't answer that based on the fact that the wide receiver market, I would say, has been relatively quiet thus far. If you look around and you look at all the players that are signing. So I do think, based on my own opinion, there have been preliminary conversations, sort of feel it out which direction both parties want to go. But I wouldn't say anyone's a lock internally to return, because it takes 2 to tango, as I say, and it depends on what the player wants money-wise and opportunity-wise. And if another team can offer a better opportunity and better money, it may put the Giants in a tough spot based on the other needs that they need to address. But certainly appreciate the phone call. Let's head back to the phone lines. Let's check in with Carl in Syracuse, joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Carl? What do you got for us?
What's happening? Yeah, I wanted to expand on what you were saying about how Darren Waller opens up the offense for other players, and I wanted to expand on how you could see Daniel Jones getting more comfortable in the offense as last season progressed, and their use of the play action, and how Darren Waller is just going to help keep the safeties and linebackers honest and open up the running game.
Well, you look at the Raiders. They had an outstanding run game last season with Josh Jacobs. He had a career year. That's why they gave him the franchise tag. But, Waller wasn't necessarily on the field much to say that he had an immediate contribution to that department. Raiders also had a pretty good offensive line, which helped. But there's no doubt about it, what you were talking about, if you're going to double Darren Waller, forget about what it does for the run game. I think it's going to open up opportunities in the passing game. Because if Isaiah Hodgins did that, and a lot of teams didn't know what to expect, Wan'Dale Robinson was barely on the field. I mean, we really saw him at the Lions game. Other than that, not a whole lot to go to. So the Giants defenders, the opposition, they're not really going to know what the Giants have, big picture perspective, with the exception of Darren Waller. So that, I think, is where he makes the biggest inroad, more so than any other facet of this offense.
Yeah, especially Hodgins, the way he was getting involved in the offense without another real threat. I mean,
sure,
that's going to be great for him. What about Cager having number 83? Do you think he's going to seek the same number that he had with the Raiders?
You talking about Waller or Cager? You brought up
Waller,
Lawrence Cager.
Because Waller shares the same number as Cager.
Carl, honestly, that's the last thing that's on my mind. I mean, I'm glad that you're invested in perhaps buying a future jersey or whatever it may be. Something tells me whether he wears 83, he wears 82, he wears 79, something tells me he's going to be a productive player regardless, and they'll find ways to throw him the ball. So appreciate it.
And then Slayton, as the other caller just mentioned, are we going to bring him back? How is he as a special teamer if he is on the roster as a depth wide receiver?
Well, he's got the length, appreciate the phone call, to be a gunner from that standpoint. But, the Giants haven't necessarily utilized him as a prominent special teamer, mainly because when you're one of the top wide receivers, they don't want to expose you on all the special teams units. So there's not a whole lot to operate with based on that. And I highly doubt that he would return simply to take on a special teams role. I think if he's going to come back, there's going to be a legitimate opportunity to compete for starting reps as a wide receiver. And then, yes, if he's a little bit further down on the depth chart, do they need to explore special teams roles? But that's not the nature of the conversation. If you bring back Darius Slayton, you're bringing him back because you feel he could contribute on offense and take advantage of some of the talent pool around him. Lance Medow with you here on Big Blue Kickoff Live as we operate through all of the reports throughout the course of this early stage of NFL free agency. Let's head back to the phone lines. Let's check in with Joe in Pennsylvania. He joins us here on BBKL. What's happening, Joe? What do you got for us?
Hi, Lance. What I have, I'm very happy. We got another playmaker, like you said, on the offense, which is going to definitely open it up. And we got a playmaker on the defense there. I mean, another stud there that's going to make our defense so much better. Like you said, he stays on the field, that linebacker. You got to love the guy they brought up there for the play in the line. Now, what I was getting at here, you are talking about Slayton. I think he's a bargain to bring back right now. There, I was hearing something like maybe 3.5 for him, and this guy from Kansas City there, the speedster, he's up there. I think his name's Hartman or something like that.
Nicole Hardman. Yeah.
Yeah. Now a lot of people want him. Hartman and Slayton came in the same time, and Slayton has, the way I have, better numbers, more catches, more yards after the catch of him, and I think Hartman wants around 9-10, and that's the thing I think we need is speed. Both of them have speed.
Sure, but they're also different players, Joe, and that's why I don't think it's a fair comparison. Hardman was on a Kansas City team where he was maybe the fourth option. He wasn't consistently in the lineup. He's not a guy that runs deep down the field. They get him out in open space, and they rely on him to get some yak, especially in the absence of Tyreek Hill last season. So I just think they're different stylistic players. That's why to just compare them from a fantasy perspective in terms of their numbers doesn't really do justice to explain the roles they played within their respective offenses.
I understand that, but the one thing they have in common is speed.
Sure.
And that's the difference between Slayton and all the other receivers we have on the team now, especially with getting this Walton. We need somebody that, you know what I mean, sometimes they're pulling the safety over to help with a speedster going by.
Yeah, well, I mean, Waller's got speed, number one. I don't think Waller gets enough credit. If you watch his highlights and you watch how he operates, for a big guy, he can move. I mean, there were plays where he got a lot of yardage after the catch, so I wouldn't overlook that. And yes, Darius Slayton does have speed, but they could also get speed in the draft too. Joe, remember, we're very early. We're barely at the start of free agency now. There's going to be other means to add speed to the roster, and one of those areas is youth in the draft, which you could do.
I understand, but like I said, Slayton to me is a proven commodity, and I think he's definitely worth like $3-4 million if that's what we would pay him a year or so now. And compared to someone like this Hartman with speed, and that's what I think we need. As long as we can get somebody, you want to get somebody in the draft, and you think he's better or money-wise, okay, I'll go with that. But I'm saying I think Slayton's a bargain now because of his speed. And
well, I mean, once again, Joe, we don't have much to operate with respect to the market, and appreciate the phone call. You have to understand, and I don't know what reports you're reading online. There's a lot of speculation, but unless you speak to the player or his agent, you really don't know what the player is looking for. And like I said, there have not been a lot of wide receiver signings outside of Jacoby Myers. And Jacoby Myers is more at the top element of the market. Not to say that he's the best wide receiver in football, but he was going to get a higher demand of the money compared to some of these other wide receivers we're talking about. And as teams realize they miss out on other players, there could then be an increased demand on other guys out on the market. So we're dealing with such a small sample size. A, I don't know if those numbers carry a lot of weight and substance. And B, you don't know whether or not the player himself wants to move on or explore other options based on roles and assignments. Hard to tell, hard to gauge that at this point. Do I think bringing back and entertaining Darius Slayton's return is wise for the Giants? Absolutely. He knows the system. He's made some big plays. And if you could bring him back as third, fourth, or fifth option, very practical move. But only Darius can answer whether or not, A, that's feasible, and B, that's his desire. Because we could sit here and say the Giants want to find a way to bring him back. Maybe there's another team, though, that blows him away or wows him. It's so early in the market. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves to say he's absolutely going to come back at this number or this is the going rate for a receiver like that. We don't have enough intel to operate at this point. But I'll go back to what Joe Schoen said. He said this on the Zoom session when they were discussing the Daniel Jones contract. The distinct difference between investing in players that come from your organization versus those outside is that you're operating with more intel. They know Darius as a player. They know him as a person. They've seen what he could do within the scheme. They see the potential of what they may be able to build off of. A guy outside of that, you can only go based on what you see on film and what you hear from other coaches or players that have been around him. So it seems as if, based on what Joe Schoen has said, the preference is make investments with your own. Assuming, though, the caveat is the numbers work. Let's head back to the phone lines. Len is in Maryland, joining us here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, Len? What do you got for us?
Hey, Lance. How you doing?
Doing all right. What's happening?
Listen, thanks for the reminder that while we're a better team today than we were yesterday, the roster's better than it was yesterday. All the other teams are trying to get better, too.
That's life in the NFL.
Yeah. And, with reference to the Eagles, of course, they re-signed Bradbury, and that's a big deal for them. On the trade itself, what's not to like? It looks terrific on paper. Even the contract looks great for us. It just leads me to continue to think that we're looking at, or management is looking at, a 3-year window here. I mean, everything seems to revolve around. Of course, it's hard to go much further than that in the NFL, but coming off the good season that we had, we've got this window. It's opening, and we got to take advantage here. And Waller certainly fits in. And
well, Len, just real quickly, I'll let you continue.
Yeah.
I think the reason why you could say it's a 3-year window, and I would agree with you, most teams operate like that just because you can't really go that far beyond due to injuries and so forth. But you just signed Daniel Jones to a contract in that ballpark. So I think like anything else, you then want to now maximize your quarterback when he's on that new deal. I think that's the rationale behind that.
Yeah. Thank you. Good point. At the very least, with Waller, there's nothing wrong with having 2 good tight ends on your team.
Sure.
I mean, it helps you immensely. So, but I think it's a terrific trade, a good move on our part. John had some comments about the linebacker. I just wanted to add to what he said. He was certainly very thorough, but 2 more things that struck me about this player. One, he's young. John didn't mention that.
Well, he's coming off the rookie contract.
I'm sure he would agree.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would agree with that. And secondly, he's an ascending player. I mean, this guy looks like, he's been in this league and he's getting better each year. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's like having drafting a college player who was a better player in his sophomore year than freshman, better in his junior year, better in his senior year. So, I mean, we got an ascending player there. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I don't pay too much attention to the cap, but maybe a little expensive. But, that's what happens in free agency. Everybody costs a little more than you think they should.
It's based on market demand, and you got to pay for good players, right?
Yeah, true. Let me ask you a question about the defensive end, and then I'll let you go. I see this guy as more of a rotational player, Lance. You mentioned half the downs. Do you think he's a hand in the ground starting defensive end in a 3-4 defense?
We're talking about Nunez Roches, right?
Yes.
Well, to me, he's a guy that's an interior lineman, And what I was saying is I said over the course of the year, I can see 45 to 50% of the snaps. I mean, it's going to fluctuate from game to game, but he could get up there. I mean, for example, he played 49% of the snaps this past season for the Bucs. And then 2 years ago, he played 45%. So, I mean, that's been his ballpark. And Tampa Bay, I think, is a decent model because they also had a rotational group of defensive linemen. But this is a guy that, has pretty good movement to identify the hole. So, I don't know if he gets enough credit for his flexibility, but I look at him more as an interior guy as opposed to an exterior guy.
Well, does that mean he's more nose tackle than he is defensive end in the 3-4?
That's what I would classify him as, the nose tackle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad we got the guy. I mean, we need depth. There's no question about that. I'm still looking for that hand in the ground starting defensive end. And I'm not looking for an all-pro. I just would like to see a major league defensive end opposite Leonard Williams on that 3-4 defense. Hey, Lance, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, you got it, Len. Appreciate the phone call. And, once again, I think expectations need to be kept in check based on the financials. As you bring in other players, you don't have nearly as much room to maybe make a big splash, to Len's point about wanting a defensive end. But I do think that probably the philosophy for Wink is if they can bring in another complimentary guy. For example, Calais Campbell is going to be available because the Ravens parted ways with him, and Paul and I were talking about him on Monday's program.
I'm back, by the way. Hello.
That news, yes. John Schmeelk has returned. For those of you just listening and not watching.
I have parachuted back in.
Yes, that was quick. That was smooth. Not as disruptive as I thought, so kudos to you for going through the drills.
I'm surprised you didn't try to lock the door after I walked out.
Well, you didn't let me move into the other seat, so I was like a statue for this entire time, okay? I was trying to follow the rules and regulations
Mission accomplished.
set forth here in the studio. However, if I was able to move, yes, I would have absolutely locked the door. I don't want to put a double bolt on.
Anyway, what I miss?
Well, you missed just a few phone calls. We were going around talking about the various different additions for the Giants. Darius Slayton has become a huge topic of consideration about whether or not he would return. But Calais Campbell, I wanted to bring him up mainly because I think that would answer what the last caller brought up with respect to wanting to look for another defensive end. And the good thing about Campbell, by the way, is he can play inside and outside, and he knows the scheme. Once again, expectations need to be realistic. He's getting up there in age. I mean, I don't know. Campbell could ultimately retire when it's all said and done. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's been in the league for 15-plus years.
He said he wants to play, though. Whatever that's worth.
But that would be a good veteran exterior defensive lineman that I think you could bring in.
Depending on cost, obviously.
100%. Right. But I would think at this stage in his career, I don't know if he's going to demand overwhelming value.
He might also prioritize going to a team that maybe he thinks is more ready to contend.
Sure.
And I'm not sure I answered that first question from the call that we had because I was too busy running out of here. But, I think there are other teams that I think you put higher on the contention list right now. Any teams, with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, any of those types of teams with those, top quarterbacks. But look, the NFC right now, folks, and I'll be honest with you, if I'm a player and I'm trying to go find a team to win a title, I'm going to the NFC. All right? It's much, the NFC is not the AFC right now. There's no Josh Allen. There's no Patrick Mahomes. There's no Lamar Jackson. There's no Joe Burrow. Just no Justin Herbert. Just go down the list, right? So, and who knows?
And that could change, of course, once the draft comes around.
Right.
But yeah,
and by the way,
now,
Aaron Rodgers might be going to the AFC too. And I do have top men tracking that Pat McAfee thing, by the way. Very rude of Pat to schedule his show during our live Big Blue Kickoff live show.
Well, something tells me, I don't know if Giants fans are that overly concerned about what may happen with the Jets
I'm just tired of having to be like every 10 minutes on the NFL Network when I'm trying to watch free agency coverage. You got to do the hey, Ian Rappaport, any update on Aaron Rodgers? No. Personally, every 2 minutes, I can't take it anymore. I just want it to be done.
I think both sides know what's going to happen. It's just a matter of it being known publicly. So I think this is just to milk as many headlines as possible.
Imagine this is the drama before he even puts on your jersey.
Well, the NFL's not complaining because
people are locked in. I know.
Atop the headlines in the midst of March Madness, so I don't think they're complaining from that standpoint.
Back to my point. The NFC is wide open. And look, the Eagles have lost players. Darius Slay, it was reported that he's going to let go today. They do bring back James Bradbury. Yep. They lose their 2 inside linebackers, White and Edwards. They lose their safety Epps. They lose Javon Hargrave, the defensive tackle. Now, what the Eagles have done a really nice job is, Lance, is drafting guys to just step in. Oh, we drafted Jordan Davis in the first round last year. He barely played for them last year. He played like 30% of the snaps. All right, you're up. Oh, you drafted Nakobe Dean last year? Oh, he didn't have to play at all last year. You're in. Go ahead. Now, a little bit tougher in the secondary, especially at cornerback and at safety.
Well, Reed Blankenship, I thought, did a nice job this past season.
Safety.
He was an undrafted
Agreed with
rookie.
that. But remember, they haven't re-signed their other safety yet either. The
C.J.
corner
Gardner-Johnson,
yeah,
who could also
the
play the slot, too, and help out a corner.
And they still have Avonte Maddox there. He's generally their slot guy. So they still have some work to do there. Their offense is going to come back. Sayamalu hasn't signed anywhere yet, but I still would be surprised if he ends up going back there because, again, they drafted Cam Jurgens last year in the second round. So the Eagles have done a good job kind of having constant reinforcements. I think Dallas has actually probably gotten a little bit better this offseason. I thought the move they did yesterday, bringing in the cornerback from the Colts, whose name, thank you, Stephon Gilmore. I think that'll be a real nice fit. Similar type of move to what the Giants did with Waller. The reason it's cheaper is that Gilmore only has 1 year left on his contract, to the point you made earlier when, Waller has 4, Gilmore just has 1. So, again, I think the Giants will be competing in the division, and I think you have every expectation for them to be in the playoffs again, depending on what happens the rest of this offseason, obviously. And given, of course, that their key players stay healthy, they win as many close games as they did last year,
that's
to
the
your
big
point.
Key. Yeah.
So, there's a lot. Guys, look, things in the NFL change a lot from year to year. We talk about it all the time. More than half, on average, of the playoff teams every season change from year to year. It's just the way it is.
I mean, I monitor that.
Yeah,
I think I went
through it
over the course of a previous show. You're talking about last season, you had a number of new teams that jumped into the fold, and this is why you can feel good about your team, and you should. And the Giants clearly have a great foundation. The coaching staff did a fantastic job last season. All arrows trending upwards, skyrocketing from that standpoint.
I'll make it very simple, Lance. Going into the season last year, we weren't sitting here talking about making the playoffs. This offseason, we're talking about being a playoff team and trying to win another playoff game and winning the division. That's the conversation now. This was not the conversation we were having at this time last year.
7 new playoff teams in each of the last 3 years. And that's across the board. That's half the field. 14 between the AFC and the NFC. So, that's why you can't take anything for granted when it comes to this landscape. But to your point, okay, when you do look at the NFC right now, the NFC South, all 4 of those teams, with the exception maybe of the Saints bringing in Derek Carr, and every other team now has brought in a new veteran. The Panthers brought in Andy Dalton. The Bucs just got Baker Mayfield. The Falcons, Taylor Heineke. And a number of those teams, I think, are going to draft quarterbacks anyway. But you're sort of in the crossroads. You don't know how that division is going to play out. The NFC West, Kyler Murray's hurt. We don't know if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. The Rams, there's been speculation, maybe moving on from Matthew Stafford. San Francisco, is it Brock Purdy? Is it Trey Lance? Is it Sam Darnold? Who knows? The Seahawks, Geno had a very nice season. Can he duplicate that?
You know me, I've been in the Sam Darnold camp. I hope he gets a chance to run Shanahan's offense to see how he does.
Yeah, part of me feels that, they moved up to get Trey Lance. And Purdy, I know, had UCL surgery, but I think they're going to do everything they can to get some of those young guys on the field.
I would think.
I think Darnold's more of an insurance policy.
Granted how injuries have struck that position in San Francisco the last 5 years.
You need 100 quarterbacks. Yeah, that's why. I'm surprised they don't have 7 quarterbacks and sacrifice another position of some sort.
It's really unbelievable.
And then the NFC North, just real quickly, is also another division where Kirk Cousins could be the seasoned vet in terms of seniority.
And that could be. Yeah,
well, I mean, Jared Goff's in the division, so I don't want to fault him.
He hasn't been with them as long as
Goff hasn't been with the Lions as long as Cousins has been with the Vikings. And, that's why we're all of a sudden coming back to the NFC East, maybe the toughest division in football.
Right.
Because you have a number of teams that have quarterbacks, and you've got teams that have good balance, too, between their offenses and their defenses.
Yep, no question about it. A couple other pieces of news today very quickly before we get back to the calls at 201-939-4513. Bills, apparently, according to Ian Rappaport, will bring back Jordan Poyer at safety, which was a big thing they wanted to do. The safety market was hot a little bit earlier in free agency. Then it kind of simmered down a little bit. Still no reports as to what might happen with Julian Love. In my opinion, the longer that lasts, Lance, the better chance he has of making a return. Just because he's still out there, and I'm sure he wants to be back, and they can make the numbers work. Hopefully they can figure something out with him. Love Julian. He's such a good dude. And then word is the Cowboys are going to completely let go of Ezekiel Elliott and cut bait with him. There was thoughts that they might renegotiate that contract, but if they release him and make him a June 1st cut, they can save a lot of money on the cap, because much like the Giants, bringing in that higher salaried player, thank you, like Waller, Stephon Gilmore is another. He makes about the same, actually, I think, as Waller. He's in that $11 million area. So the Cowboys will have to probably make some room and get creative to make room for him. But again, that takes another, need off the draft board where you can just draft the best guy and not worry about.
And you can draft a running back in this league because Tony Pollard's coming off the injury. They gave him the franchise tag. It's not a torn ACL or anything. It was just an ankle injury.
It's also just a one-year deal
against San Francisco. Correct, but I think that they also had been phasing Zeke out a little bit. That this seemed to be the natural transition. Pollard's your guy. You draft a young running back, and the cycle continues, which is what most teams are subscribing to.
Well, second contract running backs. It's the way it goes in this league.
Yeah, well, Saquon's learning that right now.
And by the way,
on the franchise
speaking
tag.
of running back, we haven't seen the running back market move that much either. David Montgomery went to the Lions. That's kind of it. None of the other big
Rashad
names
Penny
have
went
gone.
to the Eagles.
Rashad Penny went to the Eagles. They haven't put numbers on that. I'm sure that's a much lower,
he's been
lower
hurt.
deal. Yeah, I mean, the guy can't stay healthy. So we haven't seen the Miles Sanders.
And he'll be available now, Sanders.
Kareem Hunt, Alexander Madison, Donta Foreman. Who else am I missing in that group that's out there in terms of running back? But there's a really good group, and those guys haven't moved to any places yet. So
Raheem Mostert re-signed with the Dolphins.
Jamal Williams hasn't signed anywhere yet.
And now Montgomery's going to replace him, so Williams probably going to leave Motown.
Exactly. So we'll keep an eye on that as we move forward here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Don't forget, folks, the Giants official TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV and the Giants mobile app. And Giant fans, take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit Giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. Tom in Florida is up next. Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm fine, but I'm getting grouchy.
Why are you getting grouchy?
I mean... We got some guys we need to sign, man.
They signed a lot of them, Tom. There's not that many left. Who else do you want to sign?
I want to sign Brother Slayton. Now, I know he has a little butter on his fingers occasionally, but he has been a stalwart with Jones for the last couple of years, man.
They came in together.
You what?
They came in together. So that's why there's chemistry there. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just well, to me as a longtime Giant fan, and when I say long time, I mean really long time. Coming out of the Bronx, my father and I used to listen to him on the radio. That's how it's been a long time. But anyway.
And you can still listen to them on the radio, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And by the way, there's no reason the Giants still can't bring a Darius Slayton back. They haven't done anything on the wide receiver market yet, so I think that's still very possible.
Well, I'm hoping for that. Okay. I also have my eye on.
What? What happened?
What are you monitoring social media as the show goes along here?
I don't have enough brain power left to go multiple. So we need to have Slayton back. Okay. We need to also have the safety back.
Julian Love.
Love, yes. These are guys that have been sort of core for the last couple of years, and I just hate to see them go. I just hate to see it.
Well, Tom, they were draft picks. I mean, I think that's the bottom line, and appreciate the phone call. I think whenever you draft players, you want to reward them with second contracts, especially if they perform well. But, once again, this is going to be dictated based on the market. John, you pretty much echoed my sentiments from earlier in the program. Good news is none of them have been signed yet. Darius, I don't think, is looking at the wide receiver market, and I don't think he has a lot to operate with because, as I mentioned, a lot of the wide receivers haven't been signed either.
That was the other thing. Jacoby Myers moved, and that wasn't even that big of a deal. Alan Lazard apparently is, on his way to the Jets.
Yep.
So, and again, both those deals were like $11 million a year, give or take, right? The 4 for 44 reported, then like 3 for 33, something like that. So, much like the running back market, the wide receiver market hasn't moved a ton either. It's been the big guys on defensive and the offensive line that have really kind of done the damage here. I mean, a little bit in the secondary and linebacker, I guess. But, there's just not there's not a whole lot of movement there yet. And I think I want to tip my cap and give a little golf clap to the NFL teams out there. You know, we knew it wasn't a great free agency class, and I think they've done a good job of, for the most part, signing guys to reasonable, good contracts and not just giving a guy a contract at the top of the market, even if he's not a top of the market player, just because he's the best guy on the board. I think the teams in general, this free agency, Lance, have done a pretty good job of giving out some pretty fair contracts that I think help the teams. And I think these contracts will allow players to remain on those contracts for a longer period of time because they're a number that matches their ability. So,
yeah, they won't have to manipulate those numbers 2 years down the road.
Exactly. So I think for the most part it's been pretty successful so far in terms of getting guys on numbers that will allow them to stick with these teams for a while. And I thought the Jacoby Myers and Lazard thing would kind of, take the plug out of the dam and you would see more wide receivers go. We haven't seen it yet, and we haven't seen it happen at running back either. So that's something that's, I think, still coming down the road here.
Yeah, running back I'm not surprised with because I think most teams operate with the draft. It could also, the wide receiver market could be a reflection of how teams do feel about this wide receiver draft class. And they may say, hey, we had a number budgeted. It surpassed that, so we like who will be in the ballpark of grabbing in the draft, and maybe they'll just wait and see how the market plays out. I also think the Lazard signing could have been motivated based on what the Jets need to do to appease their quarterback. Maybe more so than meaning if Aaron wasn't coming, are they giving out that contract? I guess that's my question.
I hear Jordy Nelson's going to sign there too.
Well, Donald Driver, I'm sure, will follow, as will James Jones and Javon Walker.
Exactly.
And Sterling Sharp is also supposed to dust off the cleats as well.
I don't think him and Aaron played together.
No. Well, neither did Javon Walker. Listen, you want to go old school, I'll go old school, okay? Brett's days can be now overlapped with a new team with Aaron. Speaking
of which, so Aaron Rodgers has popped on with McAfee. I have some quotes here that Rappaport and Garofalo are quoting what he said. It's Aaron Rodgers. So here we go. I will say this. These are all quotes, or at least paraphrases from Ian Rappaport from Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee Show. I will say this. This isn't a decision day, as Jet fans line up on the George Washington Bridge. This isn't me announcing to the world what's going on. We're days past this. This is clearing things up. We'll see if that happens. Apparently, he said he was 90% retiring when he went into the darkness.
And then he emerged.
But it was clear to me at that
65.
point, while the Packers were saying the right thing publicly, they were going to move on, says he wishes he had heard they wanted to move on earlier. And then Tom Pelissero adds, Aaron Rodgers tells the Pat McAfee Show that, I lost the tweet, that he has made clear since Friday his intention is to play and to play for the New York Jets. So I guess it is a decision day then.
Yeah, that's why I said I think both parties know what's happening.
Yeah.
It's just a matter that there hasn't been anything signed on the dotted
line. It doesn't exactly help the Packers and Jets figuring out their cap situation.
Let's drag this on forever.
Yeah.
Once again, I don't see the Jets acquiring players unless there's been something worked out where they have a good idea that he's coming aboard. Yeah.
We have seen that before.
No, of course. Listen, until the guy signs, I understand. There's always that gray area, but I think the public is trying to milk this story as much as possible when the parties that are invested, they actually know what's happening.
Rodgers
and
also,
that's all that matters.
And Tom Pelissero also reported this earlier, and Rappaport emphasizes Rodgers also says the deal is not done, but it's a matter of getting it done by this point as the Jets and Packers work out trade compensation. So we'll see what that compensation looks like. Pelissero, I believe, said earlier today he doesn't think it's going to cost a first-round pick or multiple first-round picks. We'll see how expensive it ends up being. I think Rodgers' salary is probably going to bring down the asking price a little bit in terms of what they're going to get for him.
Who's paying what?
Yeah, and his age, too, obviously. So
39.
Everything to keep in mind. 201-939-4513. We can pick one more up here so if somebody else calls in. But our last caller on the line right now is Scott in New Mexico. We'll do him first, and if we can get one more in, we'll try. Scott, what's up?
Hey, guys. Before I get to my questions, Lance, why weren't you allowed to move to John's seat?
Because I told him not to. That's why.
Well, no, I mean, I was comfortable here. I mean, listen, I could go. I'm a big boy. I can make the decision. I just was lazy and decided to stay put and not challenge it.
In fairness, on my way out the door,
business practice.
On my way out the door, I did tell Pearson if you tried to move that he had free leave to tackle you on the air.
Something tells me that people are overlooking the Brooklyn ties here when it comes to getting the vicinity of people from there.
He also has a rope over there. He could have just lassoed you and kind of stuck you to the chair.
Okay.
But no, let me make it clear for the record, Scott. I had every right to get up. I chose not to empower myself to do that, okay? There we go.
Okay. I think the moves the Giants made were great. It negates my Jack Campbell move that I thought they would make at 25. But in any event, I think the moves with Waller and Okereke were great. My question is this. You can never have enough good cornerbacks. And
that is true, yes.
There is a number.
Never have enough of any good position, I would say.
Cornerbacks especially, though, for sure. I mean, they went through, like 7 last year over the course of the year. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But you need guys that can really, I hate to use the word shutdown because it doesn't exist really anymore.
No, but cover. You need guys that can cover. Yeah.
Right. If you, there's actually 2 comments. If you were putting on your general manager's hat now, would you opt for someone like a Darius Slay in free agency, or would you wait and think that maybe somebody like a Deonte Banks would be available at 25 to take somebody like that?
I'm not sure you can afford, Scott, somebody at the top of the cornerback market.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you – I mean, look, you can structure the contract and have the first-year cap hit be minuscule, but then that, again, will put you in a tougher spot later on. So anything's possible. My guess is that they're not going to be playing – at the top of that market just because of the cost would be my guess. They would love to add somebody there, so maybe they'll work it out and figure it out from a financial perspective. But I just think given, what money they had available, what they've spent, I'm just not sure you can bring in another, $13, $14 million a year player and have it be reasonable and afford it.
Okay. My last point is sort of a fly in the ointment question.
Oh, we love those.
I watched the workout of Odell Beckham in Arizona, and he looks sensational.
I got to be honest with you. He looked, Scott, a little too thick to me. It's good weight. He's not fat. He's not fat, but he looks much more bulked up than he was when he was here. Now, maybe that happened already in Cleveland or, Rams, wherever he was before. But he definitely looked a little bit bulkier and stiffer just watching those 2 Prince Amukamara Instagram posts that he put up there.
Okay.
That's it.
Is there a way the Giants can work out, with the cap obviously in consideration, to offer him a contract that would work for him and work for the Giants? And I'll take your answers off the air on this one.
Thank you, Scott. Well, I don't know what he's asking for. And I think there was a report yesterday that, he was asking for a fair amount.
Yeah,
he was
I believe
talking
it was
to Dallas,
about $20
right?
million. Supposedly.
Whoa, was that high?
Yeah, that I thought I saw
that's
in
not
some
happening.
of the reports. Yeah. I mean, but once again, I don't know how much stock or substance behind, but that was thrown out as a number. Yeah, to answer Scott's question, of course, they can find the deal. It depends on both parties.
Yeah.
Right?
Odell
has to meet them halfway if he wants to return. So the answer, short, sweet, and to the point is yes. That doesn't mean realistically, though, he's willing to do that.
Yeah, I just don't know what he wants, and I don't know what the Giants will be willing to offer. The Giants did say the door's open to it, that they'd be interested. Earlier in the or midway through the season when Joe Shane had his press conference, I think he said that, and then he reiterated again in the offseason. So, yeah, I mean, sure. I just don't know what that number is going to look like. I think you've added your veteran playmaker, pass catcher, however you want to talk about it. If this Waller thing happens, and again, that's just according to reports, we're not confirming that. I think you now add guys through the draft and maybe add a mid-level veteran to the receiver group in free agency and not necessarily a top guy, because I think you hope, and again, if the trade does in fact go down as reported, that Waller is kind of that guy, and then you can add through the draft.
Yeah, like a Colin Johnson-esque maybe addition.
Well,
perhaps.
Even like a Darius Slayton, like maybe they could still figure out a way to make DJ Chark work. Maybe. He hasn't signed yet.
Yeah. Well, I told you, I think he's an attractive guy. I would definitely take a flyer. But, once again, we're operating with limited knowledge on how this market's going to play
and
out.
How much money the Giants have left, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, and other positions outside of wide receiver that may want to be addressed. And remember, whether or not there's a lot to ride on this, Joe Shane, I thought, has had a consistent message, John, throughout the offseason, which is while the outside narrative is they have to bring in a star-studded wide receiver, he seems to be okay with if they address it in the draft or through other means they will still be in a good position.
Now, they did bring in a star-studded tight end, so I think
well,
he
but they
would
didn't
fall
bring in
into
a
that
star-studded
category.
wide receiver, is I guess what I'm
Correct,
saying. And
right.
it could be Waller, the return of some of these other guys that were hurt, such as Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard, Isaiah Hodgins. You had another young guy. You got Barkley on the tag.
Maybe Slayton or Richie James comes back. We'll see.
100%. I mean, that could very well be the game plan. And that by a group overall, they'll get the necessary production because Waller will draw so much attention that those guys can have some other favorable one-on-one matchups, and Daniel Jones can simply spread the wealth, and there may not be one guy that's going to lead the receiving corps every single week. It could be a Wan'Dale Robinson game, then it could be Isaiah Hodgins, and it could be then Barkley or whatever it may be.
And I know it's Patrick Mahomes, so the big asterisk goes next to it because he's a freak show and he's the best player in the world at football. He's just the best. He's awesome. Who was the Chiefs' number one wide receiver last year? To your point.
I mean, that's why earlier I referenced Kelsey.
It depended on the game, right?
Very,
you have Waller as your top guy, but he's not the wide receiver. And then other wide receivers based on how the defense plays you, game plan and stuff like that. It could be Juju. It could be Valdez-Scantling. It could be Houston. It could be Sky Moore. It could be Kadarius. You know what I mean? You just go down the line. And depending on the week, you have your main guy in Kelsey. Waller, again, if it happens. And then you figure out with wide receiver.
The other thing that I think is a fair comparison, remember, prior to last season when the Raiders acquired Davante Adams, the Raiders were structured similar to what we see the Giants on paper right now.
Yeah,
Darren Waller was the guy.
Renfro was kind of Wan'Dale Robinson, right? Kind of that slot guy.
Yeah, they had Nelson Aguilar.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
We're talking about nice wide receivers, but not guys that are all of a sudden scaring the living you-know-what.
Mac Hollins was out there, right?
Mac Hollins was out there for a little bit. Josh Jacobs was the running back. He dealt with his fair share of injuries, though.
Who was the other outside receiver before they got Adams? I'm trying to remember.
I think we named. I mean, it was really...
Did we get them all? I thought we were missing one.
Oh, well, the guy that Ruggs that.
Oh yeah, and then he got hurt.
No,
he got the legal issue.
Yeah.
That's right.
Henry Ruggs.
Yeah. Good call.
So
I know
those were the guys.
Somebody. Yep.
I mean, and I'm not telling everybody that that's extremely attractive, on paper, but 2 years ago the Raiders were a playoff team with that unit. Let's not forget. Different landscape, different conference, but it can be done. That's the point.
Yeah, and I'll say this, too. I think the other one piece of work they still have to do is center, right? Nick Gates, according to reports, signed with the Commanders. And by the way, so happy for Nick. Not happy he's in Washington. But for him to get all that guaranteed money after the injury he had, getting a starting spot, I could not be happier for the guy. I love Nick Gates. He's great. Thrilled. So happy that worked out for him. Wish it could have happened here, which is too bad. But thrilled that he got rewarded for all that hard work to come back. John Feliciano still not re-signed Lance. So who's your center right now? Ben Bredesen took a couple snaps there a little bit, but I'm not sure you want to walk in with him as your full-time starter. So I think that's another place where you have some work to do still is at center.
Draft could be an option.
Yep.
Is Josh Azudu in their plans, given the fact that, he took some practice reps there in North Carolina?
Shane Lemieux, could he be in the mix
he could
there
play
too?
there. Yeah, Shane Lemieux's another guy, somebody that's dealt with some injuries since he was drafted. All possibilities.
My guess is that they'll bring in some type of veteran presence there. That's my guess.
I mean, unless they re-signed Feliciano, which would fit the mold of a veteran, depending on how that market plays out. Because, remember, if you go back to Buffalo, Brian Daboll had Mitch Morse. So they had an established guy who they worked with for the last several seasons. And then, New England normally had its staple center. He's been with teams that have had an answer there.
Yeah.
Does that prioritize this, or do they feel, hey, with a few different guys who are young, we mold them into the mainstay? It's possible they go in that direction too. I'm not saying it's not an important position. It is, clearly. But you don't necessarily have to go out and throw a lot of money at the wall. I'm saying to answer that position.
My point is that I don't think you want to head into the draft and saying we need to find a starting center. I think you want to have somebody in the house, and maybe to your point, maybe that guy's there already. That you're going to feel comfortable day one. We starting him, we feel good about it. We'll be good to go. So I think that's kind of where they are in terms of the center position. We had gotten a tweet question about that, which is why I brought that up. That question came in from Chad's Jokes or Dad Jokes. That's not a bad Twitter handle. So we answered that question. So thanks for being with us on today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Tomorrow it will be Lance and Casillas. Then Paul and I forgot what day it was. Paul and I are with you on Friday as we continue to wrap up free agency this week in the National Football League. For Lance Medow, I'm John Schmeelk. The league year once again starts at 4 p.m. today. Hopefully some things will then become official so we can stop saying according to reports if everything does in fact happen that has been reported. We'll see you tomorrow, 12:30 on Giants.com.